to our second edition of Tech Tuesday. I'm Sarah Kennedy with Colorado Hands and Voices. I think we'll be recording this call. And Sandy Gabbard, you want to take it from there?
Yes, welcome everybody. I'm Sandy Gabbard. I'm an audiologist, and I'm with the Marion Down Center, which is a nonprofit organization in Denver. I also represent the LEND program, audiology. The LEND program is Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities. It is at JFK Partners through the Anschutz Campus School of Medicine. And we have the joy of having audiology trainees, audiologists who are specializing in pediatrics and support for families as part of what they do. And so they are chiming in and helping support this session today. I think it might be nice if our two LEND trainees, audiology LEND trainees, and they are officially, I believe, officially audiologists. Have both of you actually had a graduation virtually? So they're officially audiologists, but they are representing the LEND program, and I will let you guys chime in.
All right, well, my name is Liz, and I will kind of be taking the lead on the presentation today, but I also definitely want parents to feel free to jump in whenever they like, because this is really, I want it to be catered towards you and your questions, so feel free to stop me at any point if anything comes up.
And I'm Emily. I'll be kind of acting as Liz's support if she needs anything during this presentation. And I'm glad to see some returning faces and some new faces today as well.
Thank you. And I guess we have time for Kelly and Brendan to introduce themselves. Kelly, are you ready?
Hi, I'm Kelly. My son has unilateral hearing loss. And I also work with Colorado Hands and Voices.
Great. And Brenda?
Hi, I'm Brenda Elliott, work with Hands and Voices in Colorado Springs. Two of my kiddos are hard of hearing. The oldest is 23 and about to get new hearing aids, maybe, and he's been evaluating the youngest's experience, who's 12, with, he has the new Phonak Marvel aids, so he's been using the Bluetooth access way too much, sneaking at the table. But anyway, so it's great. Thank you for having these kind of talks.
Thank you. And I'm Sarah Kennedy. I had failed to say, the director of Colorado Hands and Voices. And I feel like I should update the audiology community. My daughter, once upon a time, stood in front of a huge group of people and said she hated the FM. And she didn't know why anyone liked it. Of course, at that time, she was only thinking about herself and not how other people perceive things. But now she is a big fan of the Roger, both the Pen and the Roger Select, and uses them daily at work. And she's a medical assistant, so dealing with all the mask situation right now, that it's really been a help.
Well, and I would chime in. I know that Hands and Voices says that what works for your child is what makes the choice right. And I would add technology to that, because at different times in kids' journey, different technology options work for them. And I think that's why we should always be thinking about sharing technology options all the time, instead of thinking that a door is closed because they have either rejected something or they tried it and it didn't work well enough for them. But technology changes pretty dramatically, as most of you know. I mean, most parents are aware when there's a big jump in technology, like there was with the Roger, the Marvel that you talked about that's Bluetooth. But the reality is audiologists are learning new software options continuously. And they may not be obvious to parents, but they're often upgrades. There are changes and things we can do, even if the hearing aid actually looks the same over time. There are often things that change in the processing, the programming, the accessibility part of it. So it's actually a good transition into our topic today. And I'll turn it over to Liz.
Okay. So I kind of, again, wanted to give just a more general overview of what was out there, because I wasn't necessarily sure what all of your kiddos have and what they're working with. So again, feel free to jump in at any point. We can get going. Oh, there we go. All right, so there's a few different ways that information is transmitted to hearing aids and cochlear implants. So Sarah kind of brought up the FM, so those have changed kind of a lot over the years, and now a lot of them have the second option, Bluetooth, built in. So that's another way of connectivity. So FM systems, Bluetooth, and then there's also wired connections. So often, you can plug actually like an aux cable in to the receiver or transmitter and have a direct connection that way. So again, I know some of you already brought up some of the accessories that your kids have used. I know, again, Sarah, you said the Roger pen and effect. Any other accessories anybody's used?
I know for my 12-year-old, it's an RM system, but somehow they extract the program from the device and load it in with this newer equipment. So that was a whole new experience. And then he has like a touch screen device, I think, and he's just feels like he's so cool and technical. And speaking of technology changes, when my oldest was in high school, we still had the boots and it was a much different system. So I don't know what those are called right now. But he's sure liking it both for his computer and at home with like a wireless music player, which is also cleverly disguised as a former cell phone without a SIM card. So
Perfect.
Our experience has been with Soundfield.
Okay, so mostly the like classroom amplification distribution.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so
Can I ask a question, Liz? Do any of you have experience using a streamer with
This is
your child's
Sarah.
hearing aids, where you wear something around your neck and it serves as an intermediary between either a phone or a computer or even a microphone?
Right, this is Sarah. We have definitely used the Compilot in a number of situations, including a stethoscope she still uses it for.
and this is Brenda. My kids had access to one, and for a while they used that with their FM system at school, but at home, neither one of them embraced it at all.
So the streamer is needed if the hearing aid is not set up to be direct connect. And newer hearing aids, more and more, are able to function with either FM or Bluetooth without a streamer.
Mhm.
But it's the same idea. It's just the streamer is no longer necessary.
yes, so kind of building on that. So FM, typically, depending on the hearing aids, how new they are, kind of what Sandy was saying, you need a transmitter and a receiver. So the teacher or anyone talking to the child often wears some piece around their neck. For example, in this picture, the Roger pen, you can wear that around your neck, and then the child would wear the other neck loop sort of as the intermediary streaming device to allow it to be sent to the hearing aids. But as Sandy was saying, again, a lot of the newer technology, you don't have to have that, it'll just stream directly. Or I know it sounds like Brenda was mentioning the newer Phonak Marvel hearing aids, you can, with the Roger, actually install the receiver technology into the hearing aids so that it can be direct streaming. So again, that's just an example from Phonak. There's obviously other manufacturers, and those parts can vary depending on the manufacturer. So there's a bunch of different options.
In the case of sound field amplification, Kelly, the receiver is actually the speaker, but it's the same idea. And when there's a speaker instead of an individual connection, then it's just like a PA system that you're familiar with in venues where a microphone is amplified to everyone. And generally speaking, sound field technology has been used in younger classrooms typically because there is a benefit potentially to all children in the classroom. Even typically hearing children, it decreases the background noise interference of the teachers. And generally it hasn't been used much for older kids. And for older kids, it's more common to use personal receivers in some way.
When typically do you see that age differentiation? Like my son's 7, so he's in 1st grade. So.
Well, that's a good question, because there is data to show that if kids have more significant hearing loss, that they could still benefit from personal receivers, even if sound field is used in the classroom. There's also pretty good data to show that kids in noisy classrooms can benefit, as I mentioned, from that increased signal to noise. And when a lot of that work was done, I know some schools were putting sound field systems, particularly in kindergarten, 1st grade, sometimes up to 3rd grade. I think much more uncommon older than 3rd grade.
Thank you for clarifying.
And kind of jumping off that too, this next question, it sounds like, you know, for you, Kelly, you may have just so far used the speakers or classroom distribution systems. And Sarah, it sounds like your daughter's had some experience with the more personal devices, as with you too, Brenda. But have any of you used some different kinds and found that your child has benefited more from one than the other, or any thoughts on that?
This is Brenda. We never used the pen. Well, we have not yet used the pen. We did before he got these new hearing aids. The Roger system he used was one that if it was vertical, it was a microphone. If it was horizontal, it was almost like the old speaker phones. And he really liked that for the group work. And honestly, because this year was so weird, I don't really know. I think he had something similar where the teacher wore the vertical, and then if he worked in the group, it still had the horizontal, even though it was connected via Bluetooth instead of with neck loop. It was just in December when he got the new aids.
Oh, okay.
But I know, as again, a mom with an older kid, you know, I remember thinking, because my older kid is a musician, like how cool it would have been to have had a Roger pen. Or I remember telling the audiologist, if we just had something he could set on the table where he could hear everybody, because he felt, you know, 15, 16 years old, kind of feels silly passing the microphone around, you know, and who wants to wait, and, you know, teenagers and stuff. So that's been our experience. It's been very positive for our younger guy.
That's great.
One thing that we should throw in here, because no one's mentioned it, is it's getting more and more common for families to use FM or Roger at home as well as in an educational environment. And so that's especially, I mean, you think now we're all at home. Wouldn't it be nice if we had something else? And when you think about what might drive your interest in having it at home, I would think about things like, when are your children challenged with access when they're not in the classroom? And obviously there are lots of things that could show up on the list. Things like when they're doing sports, when you're going for a bike ride, when you're hiking, when you're skiing, when you're at a playground. You know, all of those environments introduce either distance or noise that can put them at a disadvantage for speech understanding. And those are the types of environments where a remote microphone might be helpful. Again, how might you know? Well, obviously personal experience. You also might know if your audiologist is doing speech and noise testing. Speech and noise testing is testing speech understanding in a controlled environment, typically in a sound booth. However, educational audiologists may do a functional listening eval in the classroom. So it's testing how well they understand in noise. And you can't predict that by type or degree of hearing loss. Some kids with more significant hearing loss can actually do better in noise than you might anticipate. Some kids with very mild or unilateral hearing loss might do poorly in noise, where, poorer than you might anticipate. So it's not predictable necessarily. And therefore, as we think about times when a remote microphone would be helpful, we have to think about barriers to that connection. But part of what we want to talk about today is barriers to educational learning. So if you think about connecting with FM, for example, like directly to the computer. So there's a direct connection bypassing a speaker system, that might be another home use that might be beneficial for learning.
This is Sarah. We have definitely heard that families are struggling with remote learning, not just the connection to the teacher in the class, but if they have multiple kids and multiple things going on, that's when they're trying to directly connect for that noise situation, for sure. And I remember our daughter's first functional listening evaluation came out with the most difficult conditions at 18%, which is like, why send her to school at that rate? So we were glad to have that information to help inform the team. For a kid that looked like she was listening and learning a lot in a typical classroom, she really wasn't without that additional support.
Absolutely. And sometimes it can be sort of building off what Sandy said, but just finding the right thing that works for your kid, or, them trying out different things. It's exactly what we've even, see kids with very, very mild or minimal hearing loss that really, really need that extra boost in signal to noise to be able to focus. And I think that's where especially with remote learning, being able to kind of directly connect to that sound and maybe minimize some of that other background sound can help.
Yeah, my 6th grader is using his almost all the time. They have, I forget if it's what platform, if it's a Microsoft meeting or whatever, and then they have each day a different teacher for their different subjects has group get-togethers if the kids want to come on to either connect with their other friends, and he's finding that very helpful. His audio, as a 6th grader, he decided he really didn't need the FM system. Actually, maybe in 5th grade. So his audiologist, or his teacher of the deaf, did a functional listening evaluation with him, with and without the FM system, and showed him the results and let him decide which one he thought was more effective. And then he decided that he did, in fact, prefer the RM system. And I thought that was very clever and brilliant of her to, just bring those numbers to him, like, oh, look, like you said, you're missing 85% without. So it's amazing.
Really glad to hear that he found something that worked for him, because I think that's kind of a really important part too, is, letting the kid be able to advocate for what works well for them. And, it might be different in school versus at home. So sometimes those can translate well. Sometimes you might want something different for those different environments. Kind of going into the next slide, we touched a little bit on these already, so I'll kind of summarize. But for example, now there's not just the pen. Sarah brought up the Roger Select, which is nice because it's kind of just a square, flat thing you can put on the table, for example, at home. And you can, just have it there and don't have to worry about, passing a microphone around. So that's just an example of a newer transmitter that can be used and kind of translate between those different situations.
Can I just add one more thing, Liz?
Yeah.
The reason a lot of people are talking about the new Phonak is not just because it has Bluetooth integrated directly into the hearing aid. It also is Roger ready, meaning the Roger FM system. Roger is actually a not exactly an FM system. It actually sends the information in a broader band than an FM system. So it's kind of a step up from a traditional FM system, but it's Roger ready, meaning you don't need to plug in anything or wear anything. You do have to have it activated in the hearing aid. And I think somebody mentioned that the audiologist had to activate something. But you have to have it activated within the hearing aid, and then a transmitter, all the traditional ones, including the new ones, will go directly into the hearing aid once it's activated. And the Marvel direct access receiver is pretty new. It's only been out for a few months, and it's only been out in pediatric products for actually a couple months. So it, or more powerful hearing aids for a couple months. So it's really brand new. So it kind of takes away a whole list of options to connect to, and a whole list of hardware things you have to plug in or wear or something. And that's really what makes it very unique. And that's a good segue into Bluetooth because it's also direct to Bluetooth. But saying that, most hearing aids today have some kind of direct to Bluetooth feature in them, not just Phonak.
And to add on to that too, many hearing aids now, I keep using this as an example, but like the Phonak Marvels can connect via Bluetooth to both iPhone and Android devices. For a while, it was that you had to have an intermediary device or a streamer if you had an Android device. So I know a lot of schools use like the Chromebooks and things like that. So sometimes you may still have to have that intermediary device, but it's definitely progressing more towards more universal connectivity.
Yes, think of the hearing aids now as they are amplifiers and they have microphones, but they're also Bluetooth ear level streamers, receivers. So just like you see so many of us wearing our AirPads and all of that, the hearing aid takes the place of those types of devices.
And we've kind of already talked about what experiences you've had and what kind of different devices you've had. But have you had the experience of using some of that Bluetooth streaming, and has it been working well for you, or have there been some challenges with it?
I think for my guy, he again feels very empowered because he can participate on chats because it has, like you said, a microphone not only for what it picks up for his auditory needs, but for when he speaks. So he can be on a Zoom call or whatever, and that works for him. We have found he loves his hearing aids, so he wears them all day. But the mixed blessing is because he's using so much of that Bluetooth. One of his aids, the rechargeable battery seems to die sooner than the other, but talking with our local audiologist at Children's, I think we're going to send that in this summer because they're supposed to last a lot longer. We also confirmed with our educational audiologist, but like you said, they just came out, like we didn't even know when we ordered them if we'd get those. And so I think that's just kind of that they're finding out what the mean time between failure or maybe, something unique to his particular aids. But so far he's been really thrilled. I don't think he's tried it with the Xbox. And I kind of sometimes wish it wasn't as accessible as a parent. Because like I said, he can put that little cell phone that only streams music in his pocket. We were on a hike the other day and we're like, hey, Justin, are you listening to music on a family hike? And he was busted. So, but on the other hand, it's good to see typical behavior.
Yeah, you definitely bring up some good points that a lot of streaming can kill the hearing aid batteries more quickly for sure. So you have to be a little bit more mindful of timing and charging with that, but that's getting better as well, especially with the rechargeable hearing aids.
It is true that if you're streaming a lot, you might not get a full long day's worth of battery life. That wouldn't necessarily be abnormal. The good news is those chargers, if you put them on even for 20 minutes, you've added another 2 or 3 hours of time. And I don't know, you know, I don't know if you're aware of this, the chargers can have a built-in battery pack so they can be portable. So you can get a built-in, so you can actually charge the charger. So if you're hiking or something, you charge the charger, you put the charger in your backpack. Oh, my hearing aids are going low. Let me put them in for 15 or 20 minutes so I can make it for the rest of the day.
Okay. And full disclosure, I think he's getting close to 14 hours.
Yeah.
We're doing family game night or something. And like you said, he'll go pop one on the charger. And that's what makes my oldest, is because he's a musician and it's likely he would use that Bluetooth, probably not as much as his little brother, but just because, you know, using different recording stuff. And but thanks for that information. I'll remind, but I had no idea about that you could charge the charger. I wonder, I'll have to see if that's additional or if we actually received that.
I don't know if you got the little charger that's just a little egg, or whether you got the slightly bigger one. The slightly bigger one is the thing that you can get the charger to put on. It's
Okay.
an add-on.
Yeah, I don't know based on the size that but yeah, it's egg shaped for sure, but I don't know. Right now it plugs into the wall, electricity.
Right. Or the other option is, you know, you have those portable chargers that we all sometimes take to plug our phones into as an USB. You can also use those because the USBs, for all the rechargeable hearing aids, they have USB chargers. So you can just unplug it from the wall, and plug it into one of those battery packs that you can carry around with you and make it portable.
Great. Yeah, there was a last minute sleepover where I mentioned, do you want your charger? And he didn't. And then the next day, you know, but needless to say, next time he had a last second sleepover, he said, and would you bring my charger? So.
This is Sarah. I wanted to add on the phone use, the first time we tried Bluetooth streaming, that was a game changer. She went from really not being able to have much of a conversation unless we were clear about the topic, to being able to take orders at Domino's in that crazy environment. So that was amazing. Since then, when she got her second implant, it's not a Bluetooth function, but maybe you can tell me how it works. When she's on the phone with one implant, it streams over to the other. And I don't think that's Bluetooth because Advanced Bionics doesn't have that yet. So I don't know what function that is.
Technically, a lot of the devices are not actually streaming to both devices. They're streaming to one that's sharing to the other, which is just a technical detail. And it's streaming through what we call streaming, which is basically near range induction. So the hearing aids, cochlear implants, can talk to each other through near field induction. And because they can talk to each other, that's how they can tell where sound is coming from sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, because they can try and reduce background noise directionally. And that comes from that connection between the two hearing aids. So even the hearing aids may only be Bluetoothing to one aid. It's just sharing.
Interesting. Okay.
All right.
I have no experience with the Bluetooth, but within the next year, he's eligible, you know, to upgrade. So we are beginning to look at our options on what's going to be a good fit for him.
That's great. Definitely this will be on the list and we're going to talk more about that next week, about all the features in new hearing aids that you should think about when you're upgrading or you're trying to decide whether you should upgrade. But I would say Bluetooth, as well as how the FM connects, I think are going to be high on the list for what parents consider between different hearing aids.
And what your school is able to support.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah, here, just another slide kind of adding on to what we've been talking about with Bluetooth. That, you know, it's kind of what Brenda said, it can be a blessing and a curse. You know, I think it's super helpful and it's really a game changer. It is. But, you know, as with any technology challenges, especially with, you know, kids and teenagers, sometimes you have to be able to monitor that use and make sure they're listening to what they need to be listening to. But in a way too, that can actually be a really great motivational factor too, to get kids more excited about using their hearing aids, you know, and oh, my friends are so jealous I can stream music right to my hearing aids and it's so cool. And then there's also a lot of apps too that go along with that connectivity. So you can open it up, you can control the volume of your hearing aids just from your phone. There's a lot of other features you can mess with kind of in terms of sound quality, different kind of programs you can add and favorite, and kind of that flexibility can be controlled too of, you know, what's enabled to be changed, especially in hearing aids for kids. Sometimes we don't like to have as many programs, but the apps are also a great feature too.
Are those apps available adult version of the new Phonak, whatever they call it? I know it's not officially a Marvel hearing aid. It's got another name, but
yes. So yeah, they are available. And I think it's usually you can just look in like the Play Store, or sorry, I always forget what the Apple Store, right? And usually you can just type in like Phonak and you can find the most updated version. And sometimes there's different ones too, depending on what you want. I know, for example, Phonak has like a remote one. If you have some other accessories, you can use it just as, you know, for volume, things like that. There's apps that are more in depth, kind of what I was talking about too, with the different features you can change in programs and such.
okay. I'll just put in a plug for the programs that us to. He's just a prolific musician, and he's the only one out of the 4 kids who is that. But when he was in about 8th grade, our school audiologist read an article about that there some companies had music programs, and Phonak did, and so she loaded that onto his hearing aid, and he plays a few instruments, but you know, at the time primarily piano, flute, and sax. But when she added that program that adds those lower frequencies below middle C, and the first time he was playing piano, he looked at me, "You mean you've heard like this your whole life?" And it was just a very profound moment, because I mean, I didn't know, but I didn't think about speech sounds being those frequencies. And so, you know, I know a lot of our kids aren't musicians, but who are and who like that. So, and he has one student who's hard of hearing, so he's like, "Do you have your music program on?" But then my youngest, who plays baritone, which is a bass clef instrument, he doesn't seem to like it as much. So that's where that individual works for your kid. But I think sometimes it's easy for parents and maybe even audiologists, I don't know, but it just sort of automatically. But even if you're just listening to music, boy, you know, it's I know the lyrics aren't that all about the bass. I mean, you know, when you can hear cellos and those lower notes, or if you're listening to, you know, rock and roll or rap, please, God forgive me for my children's taste in music. But anyway, it's just something that, again, is, they don't know what they don't know, the kids, you know, and while we don't want to add a bunch of things, but that equal access, that universal, you know, they get to hear what we hear. So it's just personal plug for that.
The music programs can be in the automatic setting, but they don't work quite as well in the automatic setting. So if you do have a child that is a musician or likes listening or playing music, it would be better to create it as a manual program for older kids, obviously. And that the music program is actually a program that has no noise reduction. And other programs have very typically aggressive noise reduction, particularly for low frequencies where the speech sounds aren't as important, and for things like constant humming sounds to try and reduce fan noises and things. But in the music program, there is no noise reduction. So for example, if your child is interested in becoming a car mechanic, they may use their music program when they're listening to engines, because it takes out the noise reduction. So it's important that you work with the audiologist and talk to them about what they're interested in and what kinds of things do they want to listen to, because you may be surprised at some of the applications of some of those programs that are kind of untraditional.
Right. No, my oldest uses his music program for everything. He doesn't ever change it. and my youngest hardly ever goes to it, but it is set up as a manual program on both. But interesting, thank you.
Yeah, and just adding on to what Sandy said, I think they can be utilized for a lot of different things. You know, music doesn't just mean music, but it also is nice, I think, to have it as a manual program, because I've definitely run into with some patients, especially while trying to watch TV when it's an automatic program. Music can already be kind of overpowering, especially when we're watching TV. So sometimes when it's an automatic program, that can make TV a little unpleasant or challenging. So that's another kind of thing to think about if you want it to be manual or automatic, depending on your child.
And just to add to that, for younger children, parents can use the program for young children. If they do need to turn the hearing aids off because they fell asleep or something, you can change it on the app if your phone is connected to their hearing aids.
Okay, and I know we're kind of running short on time, but and we kind of already touched on this question. There's been great discussion, so I just want to thank everybody for that. So kind of we've talked about some challenges and what's worked well. Just a little add on to, we talked a little bit about the wired connectivity. So, you know, I'm sure we've all had experience with things like Bluetooth sometimes being intermittent or just not wanting to work for whatever reason that day. So there are options too for wired connectivity, so that direct connection, which can be helpful if it is being spotty or things like that, or doesn't have that option yet if it's not as new of technology.
And Liz, can you put that slide back up just for
Oh, yeah.
those of you who haven't seen it? Down in the lower right hand, that is actually a TV Connect, where you can plug into the TV, and that basically makes it so somebody that has the technology in their hearing aid would hear directly from the TV, not from the speakers. So if you wanted them to have their Xbox only in their ears and not in through the speakers, for example, you could hook up a TV Connect, which doesn't need an FM system purchase. It's just a little add-on to the hearing aid streaming.
All right. So then just kind of a last question. We kind of talked about what systems have worked best for you, and asking, does capability for connection drive your decision when choosing a device or manufacturer for your kids?
I think for us, our audiologist just recommended sticking with the same brand because the auditory experience of like our school district, I think allows Oticon or supports Oticon and Phonak. And so we just went with what we knew for their experience, but then we felt pretty, I mean, the 12-year-old was really psyched about all the tech. So that just happened to fall into place well for us. And the new cover, because he has golden hair. I know, so funny.
About
Oh, Kelly, you're not coming through very clearly. And now
and when we did our
Kelly, do you want to type in?
yeah, maybe you want to type in the chat, and it looks like she's frozen maybe. And of course, as an implant user, my daughter's kind of trapped in the manufacturer at this point, but I think it does drive some decision making for families new to the whole stream. Kelly, are you back? Nope, I think she's still
Oh
frozen.
no.
Well, and I think it's
Sarah, as an
especially-
add-on to what you were saying, if you don't know, cochlear implants work with this. If you're bimodal, if you're wearing a hearing aid and a cochlear implant, there is a hearing aid partner to that cochlear implant. So you are kind of limited by the partner to the cochlear implant company that you have. But there is a partner, meaning you could stream to both at the same time.
Right.
And it looks like Kelly posted in the chat, sorry, that we lost you. She said that they've used both, and they started with Oticon, and it was suggested they switch to Phonak, so they've had a bit of a different experience. It looks like you're unfrozen, Kelly, so do you feel like you've had a pretty good experience with both, or have you preferred one? Oh no, maybe not.
Yeah, I can't tell.
Actually, a nice segue to our topic for next week, where we're going to talk about features and kind of what drives the decision between companies. Because I do think the audiologist is looking probably beyond, it is typical to keep you in the same technology, but sometimes there's a huge jump in features by a particular company, either because it works with a particular cochlear implant or it works with a particular school setup. And so those are kind of things to think about but we will go over those next week.
Sounds good.
Well, and when my youngest was little, we had a different brand of hearing aids, and then he ended up switching to Phonax. But again, that may have been in part because that's what my oldest used, and then we could use the same batteries and things like that. But I wonder too if that drives a little bit, like with Kelly's kiddo being younger, and to help, and I would think too, neurologically, if you're hearing things differently, that just builds more neural pathways and more brain development. Although I guess that could be frustrating as your brain is transitioning too. I don't know. Have you guys found that as audiologists, where kids have experienced a transition time, if you will?
Yeah, actually, when we transitioned from analog to digital hearing aids, which was, about 15 years ago, it was a huge challenge, particularly for lifelong hearing aid users, either kids or adults who had worn hearing aids as kids, because the difference was in loudness compression primarily. And so with a lot of the kids, being that I'm old and I transitioned a lot of kids during that time, we would sometimes have to increase the loudness envelope and gradually decrease it, because it actually helps them to decrease it because it eliminates some unnecessary sounds, but they were so used to hearing it. And to this day, you'll have deaf and hard of hearing adults who grew up with hearing aids who say, I do not want a digital hearing aid. And it's not so much the digital itself, it's the way sound is processed, and it's foreign to them. And to this day, many of them don't like it. So yes, there's lots of transition challenges, not just in slight things like an Oticon versus a Phonak are actually relatively slight changes, but sometimes there's big jumps in technology that can change the sound pretty dramatically. And those are hard.
Right. I have 2 adult friends who refuse. They just don't like the digital. And I know when my oldest went from analog to digital, it was a big difference. Although, he was 6, we didn't know. But even when my 12-year-old got her, he put him on and he's like, oh, I'm much cooler now. So, there's just ways that it sounds, even though it was both phone technology change, it's just been beyond the journey.
One of the challenges is the adults who are deaf that wore hearing aids as children 20 years or more ago, is sometimes the output volume on those hearing aids is actually enough to damage hearing. And the digital hearing aids limit that. And so sometimes there are good reasons to limit it, even though it may not sound as loud as they'd like it.
Right. And from my perspective as a parent, seeing the changes between the oldest and the youngest, where the oldest had, and I would hear them say, well, try 2 and 2.5, like on the dial. And then when my youngest came along, they had that real ear test. So that was just phenomenal, where they could actually measure and then be much more precise. And I was just, my mind was blown. And then later I realized, wow, it was probably a pretty big guess on an infant with analog. So God bless you, audiologists, for being good guessers.
I didn't like those days when there was more guessing and less science. Now there's a little more science. Not that there isn't a little bit of guessing, but there's more science than there was, back then when the hearing aids were linear and there weren't as many options.
Pros and cons.
Pros
Well,
and
we
cons.
look forward to picking this up again next week.
Absolutely.
on that topic. So thank you all so much.
Hopefully we'll see everybody next week.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.